Is another complication. He gets one today as Defense Secretary Aspen delivers his recommendations on gays in the military. Gay activists say they've been told the Secretary has settled on the policy known as don't ask, don't tell. Although publicly, at least, Aspen's not telling.
What are you going to recommend, Mr. Secretary?
A moment of your time, please, sir. Thank you. No, thank you.
The new policy is based on the Joint Chiefs' assertion homosexual behavior is not compatible with military service. Under the plan, new recruits would not be asked their sexual orientation, and so-called witch hunt investigations would be stopped. But soldiers and sailors would still not be allowed to openly declare their homosexuality, and even private homosexual...
Don't tell, don't pursue policy really hits home. Koza, a former Navy communications specialist on the USS Kitty Hawk for 3.5 years, had his whole life turned upside down when it was found out that he was gay.
It was very horrifying at first, but after a while, I just calmed down, just got myself together and called home and told them the situation. When I was on duty, I was doing my job. When I was off duty, it was my life. What I did was my life. It was my private life.
Because he cooperated, Koza was honorably discharged in December of '88. Koza says he is outraged by Clinton's decision.
I would say the campaign, he was saying that he would lift the ban totally. And now with this new thing, don't tell, don't ask, and so-called don't investigate, I think it's bogus, totally bogus.
Koza is not the only one angered by Clinton's policy. Local leaders of veteran groups say they also feel betrayed.
It's a sellout for us, but what he has done is he's tried to cover his tracks. I think Colin Powell and a lot of the other great military leaders were going to leave the service to get away from him. In fact, Norman Schwartz was quoted as saying that he hasn't been invited to the White House, but he feels that the president has a lot of funny ideas about the military, and many of us feel the same way.
Let me say, I don't believe the gays and the military, the two don't go together.
I was in the Second World War and the Korean War, and I know of guys that they never bothered me, they never bothered other fellas. But today, I don't know.
Choosing pragmatism over principle, the president told an audience of officers at Washington's Fort McNair he has adopted a version of the policy known as don't ask, don't tell.
It is the best way to proceed because it provides a sensible balance between the rights of the individual and the needs of our military to remain the world's #1 fighting force.
The new Clinton policy states homosexual conduct is incompatible with military service. Under it, recruits will no longer be asked their sexual orientation, and the military will no longer actively search for homosexuals. But gays could reveal their status only at their own risk. Being homosexual is still grounds for dismissal. That is a far cry from what Mr. Clinton had promised coming into office.
But I don't think people should be disabled from holding jobs and being successful citizens because of their status. I just don't.
To the last, gay activists held out hope the president would keep his promise and watched his announcement with a sense of betrayal.
No press spin or renaming of this policy will change the reality that gay men and lesbians will continue to be discharged for their sexual orientation.
But the president insists their goal, a total end to the ban, is unachievable, given the opposition in Congress. Legislation to make the existing ban on gay service law is already moving through the Senate, sponsored by Armed Services Chairman Sam Nunn.
We will, of course, keep up the fight in any case, and it will now go to court. And no matter what the outcome, anything short of a total lifting of the ban, obviously, was going to continue to be fought out in court there.
Regardless of the ban's legislative fate, several gay groups say they will now sue, seeking to show a ban based on status is unconstitutional.
Because it provides a sensible balance between the rights of the individual and the needs of our military to remain the world's #1 fighting force.
President Clinton has chosen compromise over commitment, abandoning a campaign pledge to reverse the ban on gays serving in the military. Instead, he is aiming to at least change the status quo. Under the new policy, recruits won't be asked about their sexual orientation, and the military won't actively seek to find out. But gays who do admit their sexuality do so at their own risk. It's a far cry from what the president promised.
Openly gay men and women from serving. Now Congress is getting involved. The nation's top uniformed officer made the case to senators that it's wrong for service members to have to lie about who they are.
It is my personal belief that allowing gays and lesbians to serve openly.
Announced he will work with Congress this year to repeal the law known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell. He subsequently directed the Department of Defense to begin the preparations necessary for a repeal of the current law and policy. I fully support the President's decision.
I cannot reconcile nor turn my back on the negative perceptions held by our Marines who are most engaged in the hard work of day-to-day operations in Afghanistan. We asked for their opinions, and they gave them to us. Their message is that the potential exists for disruption to the successful execution of our current combat mission should repeal be implemented at this time. In the final analysis, I'm faced with two questions. Based on what I know about the very tough fight in Afghanistan, the almost singular focus of our combat forces as they train up and deploy into theater, the necessary, tightly woven culture of those combat forces that we are asking so much of at this time, and finally the direct feedback from the survey, my recommendation is that we should not implement repeal at this time.
Precipitous repeal is not. It is not a place where your armed forces wants to be.
I concur with the report's recommendations on how to implement the repeal of the current law. Allowing gay and lesbian Americans to serve in the Coast Guard openly will remove a significant barrier to those Coast Guardsmen who are already serving capably and who have been forced to hide or even lie about their sexual orientation. Forcing these Coast Guardsmen to compromise our core values of honor, respect, and devotion to duty, and to continue to serve is a choice they should not have to make.
Supporters of gay rights wanted for 17 years an end to the military's ban on openly gay service members. Retired Commander Zoe Dunning started challenging the policy called Don't Ask, Don't Tell more than a dozen years ago.
It's been a very long journey and a lot of dark years where we thought we weren't going to make any progress. But we have, slowly but surely, step by step, 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but we did it.
On Saturday, the Senate voted 65-31 to overturn the policy that stood since 1993. 8 Republicans sided with the Democrats.
As we enter the holidays now, it's also the best thing we could do to say to the American people that we're still able to come together in a bipartisan way to right a wrong and do something that's in the best interest of our country.
This is the 3rd time the legislation made its way to the Senate floor. Republicans blocked it twice on procedural grounds. The House passed an identical bill earlier this week. GOP senators against the change say it will harm the effectiveness of service members.
They will do what is asked of them, but don't think that it won't be at great cost.
This is harmful during a time of war and irresponsible manner in which to change policies that the Commandant of the Marine Corps has stated could actually risk lives.
A recent Pentagon report highlighted short-term challenges to repealing the policy, but showed minimal long-term risks on military effectiveness. President Obama is expected to sign the bill into law next week, but the policy change could take...
Are there any senators in the chamber who have not voted or wish to change their vote? Hearing none, the chair will remind the galleries that expressions of approval or disapproval are not in order. On the question before us, the yeas are 65, the nays 31. The motion to concur in the House Amendment to Senate Amendment to House Resolution 2965 is adopted.
Secretary Gates.
Mr. Chair, I fully support the President's decision. The question before us is not whether the military prepares to make this change, but how we best prepare for it. We have received our orders from the Commander-in-Chief, and we are moving out accordingly. I have appointed a high-level working group within the Department that will immediately begin a review of the issues associated with properly implementing a repeal of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy. Accordingly, I am naming the Department of Defense General Counsel, Jay Johnson, and General Carter Ham, Commander of U.S. Army Europe, to serve as the co-chairs for this effort.
It is my personal belief that allowing gays and lesbians to serve openly would be the right thing to do. No matter how I look at this issue, I cannot escape being troubled by the fact that we have in place a policy which forces young men and women to lie about who they are in order to defend their fellow citizens. For me, personally, it comes down to integrity. Theirs as individuals and ours as an institution. I also believe that the great young men and women of our military can and would.
Based on responses from 115,000 servicemen and women, the Pentagon panel decided the risk of allowing gays to serve openly in the midst of war would be low.
A strong majority of those who answered the survey, more than 2/3, do not object to gays and lesbians serving openly in uniform.
70% said it would have a positive, mixed, or no effect. But that majority does not exist among combat troops, the ones doing the fighting and dying.
Within the combat arms specialties and units, there is a higher level of discontent, of discomfort, and resistance to changing the current policy.
48% in Army combat units and 58% in the Marines said repealing the Don't Ask, Don't Tell law, which for 17 years has banned gays from serving openly, would have a negative or very negative effect. As a result, the chiefs of the armed services are not convinced the risks of repeal are low.
Their concerns revolve around stress on a force after nearly 10 years of war.
The panel, which included a top general who was personally opposed to homosexuality, cited the military's experience with racial integration, accomplished in the face of much greater prejudice and now widely recognized as having made the military stronger. Gates called on members of Congress to repeal Don't Ask, Don't Tell during the current lame duck session and warned that if they don't, the courts will.
Those that choose not to act legislatively are rolling the dice that this policy will not be abruptly overturned by the